The global music world shook to its very core when, at the age of 75, André Rieu, the undisputed king of the waltz, collapsed mid-performance. A moment of brilliance turned into tragedy, leaving millions asking, what triggered the downfall of a man who had once lifted entire stadiums into euphoria? To understand that collapse, we must first look back at his life. Born on October 1, 1949, André Rieu entered a household where discipline mattered more than a child's sanity. He was the third of 6 children, and his father, also named André, was a renowned conductor admired by orchestras worldwide. But at home, admiration turned into fear. The baton that commanded symphonies ruled the household with the same merciless hand. Love was cold, imagination unwelcome. My parents didn't love me, Rieu would later confess, not as a cry for sympathy, but as a quiet fact carved into his soul. Then, at just 5 years old, a slender 18-year-old violin mentor changed his life. She didn't scold him or demand perfection, she coaxed him to feel. In the sweep of her bow, André discovered something no parent had ever given him: freedom. It wasn't love, it wasn't romance, it was the sound of life itself, trembling through strings. From that moment, music wasn't practice, it was survival. But passion always comes at a cost. His teenage devotion to waltzes clashed violently with his father's harsh austerity. "I didn't raise you to play waltzes," his father once roared, words meant not only to scold but to crush. Then came another blow. In 1968, André fell for Marjorie, the woman who would become his lifelong partner. His mother, furious, demanded she leave. That very night, André walked out and never turned back. His parents never attended a single concert, even as he rose to international fame. Stadiums filled with applause, but at the core of his being was a hollow silence he could never shake. For Rieu, the violin wasn't an instrument, it was a lifeline. By 1978, after enduring the rigid formality of classical music halls, he rebelled. He launched the Maastricht Salon Orchestra with 12 dreamers who played not for critics, but for people, at weddings, small town halls, forgotten border towns. At the heart of this movement was Marjorie. She managed the bookings, the finances, and even ghost-wrote arrangements. She was invisible to the audience, but essential to the magic. When André doubted himself, she grounded him with one sharp command: sell more records. In 1987, his quiet revolution became official. He founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra, 12 musicians with one radical mission: to restore joy to music. They ditched the stiff black tuxedos, embraced color, and invited audiences to laugh, dance, and reclaim the art form. Critics mocked them as musical pornography, but fans surged in by the millions. In 1995, Rieu achieved the impossible, transforming a Champions League football stadium into a cathedral of waltz, as tens of thousands swayed to the rhythm of Shostakovich. It was a legendary moment that launched him to global stardom. Soon, he stood shoulder to shoulder with rock icons like Pink and AC/DC. In Australia, he sold out stadiums with crowds of 38,000, numbers unheard of for classical music. Families wept, grandparents danced, and audiences left with something greater than entertainment: hope. Rieu wasn't selling concerts. He was healing people. But behind the golden lights and sold-out arenas, the maestro himself was breaking down. In 2010, disaster struck. A viral infection attacked his inner ear, devastating his sense of balance, the very core of a violinist's existence. Tours collapsed, shows were cancelled, and Rieu, once a pillar of energy, lay bedridden, dizzy, unmoored. Doctors could not fix him. His myth cracked. And yet, salvation came in the form of a letter. An Australian fan, who had battled the same condition, shared a set of vestibular exercises. Desperate, André tried them. Slowly, painfully, balance returned. After months of withdrawal, he rose again. First to his feet. Then to the stage. And finally, to the hearts of millions who believed they had lost him forever. Unsteadily at first, then firm, André Rieu returned to the stage. His comeback tour was hailed as a triumph, not just of music, but of spirit. To the world, it looked as though the king of the waltz had restored his perfect self. But the truth was darker. No wound, whether physical or emotional, ever heals without leaving its trace. The vertigo may have receded, but his equilibrium remained fragile. Doctors warned, if the illness struck again, and if it happened on stage, it could be fatal. That warning became more haunting as the years unfolded. In December 2016, during a tour in Leeds, tragedy ripped through Rieu's orchestra. His dearest friend, Ruud Merckx, a trombonist and lifelong companion, died suddenly in his sleep. The news hit André like an earthquake. Without hesitation, he cancelled the Nottingham show, then shut down the rest of the tour in London, Birmingham, and Glasgow. This time, it wasn't sickness. It was grief, raw, inconsolable, final. He was like a brother, Rieu admitted later. The orchestra, a family in every sense, mourned together. When the music finally returned, it carried the weight of what had been lost forever. And still, André pressed on. In 2019, struck by a vicious flu that drenched him in sweat and fever, he walked onto the stage with his signature smile. To the audience, he seemed unchanged. But those closest to him saw the truth, he was fighting for every note. Then came March 2024 in Mexico City, a moment that would test him beyond breaking. 6 sold-out concerts awaited him, a celebration of victory. But after just the second show, Triumph collapsed into crisis. Altitude sickness, jet lag, and flu converged like a storm. Backstage, feverish and disoriented, André whispered into his phone to Marjorie, "I don't want a first concert day like this ever again." For concerts were cancelled. Over 40,000 ticket holders were left furious. The entire orchestra, all 125 musicians, were sent home mid-tour. Flights reversed. Refunds issued. It was chaos, a public unraveling that threatened the dignity he had built over decades. Out of that collapse, a new figure rose, his son, Pierre. No longer just a tour manager, Pierre became a shield. He imposed what André never could, boundaries. No more intercontinental marathons. No more reckless schedules. Performances slowed to Europe only, carefully timed, with recovery and rest woven into every plan. Pierre had become curator of tempo, deciding whether his father could endure a flight, a venue, or a stage. It wasn't weakness. It was survival. And it transformed everything. This was not the fall of a maestro, it was the rebirth of one. André Rieu, once defined by endurance, was now defined by care. Each performance became more human, more fragile, and somehow more unforgettable. By the summer of 2024, the transformation was visible. But slowing down carried its own hidden cost. For decades, constant movement had been André's oxygen. Now, with Pierre tightening the reins, every concert carried a new pressure, the need to prove he could still do it. Not just to his audience, but to himself. That July, he returned to Maastricht, his hometown stage, the safest ground of his career. The concert sold out instantly, as it always had. But backstage, preparation was no longer routine. Medical clearances were required. Oxygen tanks were readied. Rest intervals were built into rehearsals. His team, once obsessed with lighting cues and sound levels, now coordinated with physicians and therapists. The audience never saw the checklist taped to his dressing room wall. Hydrate before stage. Limit encore length. No post-show handshakes until heart rate stabilized. These weren't suggestions. They were rules, enforced by Pierre with the same seriousness André once reserved for tempo markings. And yet, even with the walls closing in, André Rieu's music continued to rise, fragile, mortal, but more powerful than ever. Yet even as the rules tightened, André Rieu never let the audience see the weight he carried. On stage, he still glided as though time itself bowed to the rhythm of his bow. But behind the curtains, every step was measured, every decision calibrated. His body was no longer the silent partner it once had been, it demanded negotiation, compromise, humility. André, however, was never a man to surrender. Music had been his defiance since childhood, his weapon against silence, and his answer to pain. He had turned discipline into laughter, repression into melody, and loneliness into a chorus of waltzes that united millions. Now, as age and fragility threatened to dim that light, he found a new kind of strength, not in fighting harder, but in letting others carry some of the weight. Pierre became the steward of that transition. To the world, he was simply the son of the maestro. But within the orchestra, he was the quiet architect of survival, the one who drew boundaries his father had never dared to, the one who made sure that every note on stage could still be played without breaking the man behind the music. Together, father and son rewrote what it meant to lead. By 2024, André Rieu was no longer just a performer. He was a symbol of endurance, vulnerability, and the beauty of fragility. His concerts weren't just shows, they were reminders that joy itself was worth fighting for, even when the body faltered. In Maastricht, in Vienna, in stadiums that had once roared like cathedrals of sport, audiences now gathered not just for the waltz, but for the man who still dared to play it, imperfect, human, and unforgettable. André often said, "With us, you don't feel the solemn hush that drives people away. With us, you feel alive." Perhaps that was his true genius, not that he conquered music, but that he gave it back to the people in its most essential form, joy. Now, at 75, each performance feels like both a celebration and a farewell. Every bow, every smile, every note hangs heavier in the air, as though the audience knows that nothing lasts forever. But maybe that's the point. Maybe André Rieu's greatest lesson was not hidden in the grandeur of the waltz, but in the fragility of the man himself, that beauty is never eternal, but while it lasts, it can make the world dance. Even with the safeguards, the old tempo sometimes threatened to break through. On the third night in Maastricht, André extended a waltz far beyond its planned length, swept away in the swell of strings. The orchestra followed, the crowd stood, and for a brief moment it felt like the past. But when he stepped off stage, his shirt clung to him with the same damp heaviness he had once felt in Mexico City. Pierre's expression said everything neither dared to speak aloud. The line was still there. And they had nearly crossed it. The adjustments were not just physical, they were artistic. André quietly reshaped his concerts, lowering the intensity in ways only trained ears could detect. The fiery polkas grew fewer, while slower waltzes and lyrical storytelling began to dominate his set lists. Fans embraced the change, unaware it was also strategy, an illusion of endless stamina, carefully crafted to conserve strength. At home in Maastricht, André found a softer rhythm. The cobbled streets, his 15th-century garden, and quiet rehearsal spaces replaced grueling hours with the full orchestra. He practiced privately, storing his energy for performance days. Friends noticed the difference: fewer late-night calls, a gentler voice, a new willingness to say no. When he finally stepped back onto the stage after his long health battle, the applause was deafening, but it wasn't just celebration. It was relief. For months, no one had known if the King of the Waltz would ever return. His first concert back in Antwerp sold out instantly, even before his illness. Many expected a shorter, scaled-down performance. Instead, Rieu delivered 3 full hours without cutting a single piece. To the untrained eye, he was unchanged. But the sharp observer noticed, he sat more between numbers, paced himself carefully, and for the first time in decades, Pierre stood side stage through the entire show. Behind the scenes, Pierre had quietly become more than a tour manager, he was a guardian. He made the final calls, oversaw production, and carried strict instructions from doctors: if his father showed signs of dizziness, he was to stop the performance. The responsibility was immense. This was no longer just about music. It was about his father's health. Midway through the 2010 tour, a moment unfolded that fans still talk about. In Maastricht, during an encore, André called Pierre to the stage. The crowd erupted as Pierre reluctantly stepped into the spotlight. Handing him a microphone, André asked his son to sing along with the orchestra. Pierre was no professional singer, but the audience didn't care. They saw something rare, not the maestro, but the father. The clip went viral, offering a glimpse into a bond the world had never truly seen. But the grind of touring never loosened its grip. In Brazil, the heat was suffocating. In Australia, jet lag was punishing. To adapt, the team reorganized set lists, placing the most demanding numbers early in the evening when André's energy was highest. Even then, the risk lingered. A recurrence of vertigo could end everything in an instant. Pierre knew it. André knew it. And yet, the music continued. Fans began to notice subtle changes. More audience interaction. More storytelling between pieces. It was intimate, personal, part performance, part confession. André was no longer just playing music, he was inviting audiences into his own journey, his struggles, his victories. By 2012, the global tours were in full swing again. Financially, the comeback was astonishing: millions in ticket sales, top-selling DVDs, annual Maastricht concerts broadcast to cinemas worldwide. But behind the glamour, the balancing act never ended. Pierre's role grew even larger. He negotiated longer setup times, insisted on medical staff at every venue, and began quietly preparing for the question André refused to face: what happens when he can no longer tour at this scale? The schedule remained relentless. In 2016 alone, over 100 performances tested both body and spirit. During a show in Vienna, André paused longer than usual between numbers. Pierre edged closer, watchful. The music continued, but later André admitted he had felt faint during the set. It was a chilling reminder: no matter how careful they were, the risk never left. From then on, adjustments became strategy. André gave more solo time to orchestra members, building rest into the show without breaking its magic. Fans loved the generosity. For André, it was survival. In 2019, the Maastricht concerts shattered records. Thousands sang along as he stood smiling, bow in hand. It could have been the perfect ending to a legendary career. But he wasn't done. Then, the pandemic struck. For the first time in his adult life, André was forced to stop. No tours. No stages. No applause. He spent the month rehearsing, recording, and reflecting. The pause showed him what life without constant travel might look like. When restrictions lifted, his return was explosive. Audiences were bigger, louder, and more emotional than ever. They had missed him. But he had missed them more. Now, at 75, André Rieu still performs with the same passion that made him a global phenomenon. But every note carries weight. Each performance feels less like routine and more like a victory, a defiance of time, illness, and doubt. Fans celebrate the joy. Those who know his story hear something else: the sound of survival. And yet, one conversation lingers in the shadows. A private exchange between André and Pierre, overheard by someone close to the team. A possibility that could change everything. A final world tour. The biggest they have ever attempted. No dates announced. No details confirmed. But if it happens, it will test everything they have built: the music, the stamina, the bond between father and son. And for the first time since his collapse, the question is no longer if André can do it. It's whether he should. If the rumored final tour does materialize, it will not simply be another string of concerts. For André Rieu, it would be the culmination of decades spent shaping an art form that many thought belonged only in gilded halls. He had taken the waltz, a genre dismissed by critics as outdated, and turned it into a global spectacle, filling arenas and stadiums with audiences who sang, laughed, and sometimes cried through every performance. A farewell tour would not just celebrate the music, it would celebrate the man who proved that classical tradition could live in the modern world. Behind the glamour, however, preparations are delicate. The logistics of a worldwide production of such scale demand immense planning, and Pierre shoulders much of the weight. From negotiating with venues to ensuring medical contingencies are in place, every detail must serve two purposes: delivering the magic fans expect, while guarding André's health like a fragile masterpiece. For Pierre, it is both a professional task and a personal mission. He is no longer just his father's manager, he is his shield. Among fans, whispers of this possible farewell have already stirred anticipation. Some hope it will be a triumphant final bow, a last chance to see the maestro live before he retreats from the stage. Others refuse to believe it, convinced that a man like André Rieu could never stop performing. Indeed, André himself has given conflicting signals. In interviews, he laughs off the idea of retirement, saying music is the air he breathes.